June 5th, 2025 a.m. A call comes into emergency dispatch center in Hanhana, South Carolina. On the line is 37-year-old Matthew Speck. His voice is shaky, breathing heavy. He tells the dispatcher that two intruders broke into his home in the upscale Eagle Landing neighborhood. According to Matthew, they attacked him and his wife while they were asleep. He claims he has been hurt. When patrol unit arrived, dawn hasn't yet broken. The area is still cloaked in darkness. Officers secured the perimeter. The front doors are locked. The windows are intact. There are no obvious sign of forced entry. Inside the house, everything seems untouched until they reach the second floor. In one of the bedrooms, officers discover 33-year-old Caitlyn Speck lying on the bed. She is unresponsive. At the foot of the bed, on a rugged of napedon, is the family's golden Labrador, Bailey May. She is also gone. Matthew greets officer with the blood on his clothes. There are fresh cuts on his arms and stomach. He tells detective he was wounded in a struggle with the alleged attacker, who, according to him, fled just a moment before the sound of approaching sirens. As investigator combs through the home, they started to notice things that do not quite add up. Wallets, electronics and jewelry remain untouched. Nothing has been ransacked, no drawers opened, no sign of frantic search for valuable. The house is neat, except for the bedroom where the tragedy unfolded. To understand what really happened that morning, we have to go back 12 years. The story begins in 2008 when Caitlyn Conran met Matthew Speck at the community event. Caitlyn, born August 80, 1986, was working from home as a designer at the time of the evidence 2020. Her career allowed her to spend most of her time in Hanhana, in a two-story house nestled in the quiet street of Eagle Landing. Her constant daytime companion was Bailey May, the golden lab she considered a true member of the family. Matthew Speck, who was 37 at the time of the incident, had been living with Caitlyn since early in their relationship. Thus too knew the couple described their life as steady. They owned properties, invested in home improvement, and never aired personal issue in public. Caitlyn had been planning a major home renovation. She often chat with friends about interior ideas and spent time picking out designs material. She frequently said how much she enjoyed the peacefulness of suburban life and the freedom to work comfortably from home. Behind what seemed like a stable and happy home, close friends of Caitlyn had begun to notice a troubling shift in Matthew's behavior. In the final year of their marriage, Caitlyn confided in her inner circle about growing emotional distance. According to her, Matthew was spending more time away from home and had become noticeably cooled in their conversations. Still, Caitlyn kept pouring energy and money into the house and into the life they had built. She wasn't seeking a separation. She hadn't looked for a new place to live. Everything inside the Eagle Landing remained unchanged. Her design sketches were still laid out on the table. Building supplies were stacked neatly in the garage, and her daily routine continued to revolve around Bailey May's care. This was Caitlyn's safe space, her sanctuary. What she didn't know was that the rhythm of her life had already become the subject of calculated planning by the very person she shared that home and bed with. While medics attended to Matthew Speck injuries, forensic team got to work on the technical analysis of Hanhana property. The investigator first priority was to figure out how the alleged intruders had gotten in. But something didn't sit right. The perimeter showed no sign of forced entry. Every single access point was locked tight. The front door was secured with a deadbolt and internal latch. All windows upstairs and down were unbroken. The frames were tightly sealed and the mesh screen were intact with no slits or pressure marks. Inside, the scene told a story that clashed with Matthew's version of events. In the foyer, Caitlyn's wallet was sitting undisturbed on a side table with cash and credit card still inside. In the living room, expensive laptops and other electronics where anyone would expect to find them. Not a single drawer had been pulled open. Clothes in the closet were untouched. On the kitchen floor and in the hallways, there were no footprints, no streak of dirt, no evidence that someone had stormed through in a hurry or that a scuffle had taken place involving more than one person. The bedroom where Caitlyn had been found was a sealed-off space. According to Matthew's account, two men had burst into the room, fired a shot, wounded him and fled. But the forensic breakdown told a different story. For anyone to have exited the house, they would have had to relock the deadbolt and latch from the inside, and an impossible move unless they were still in the house or had keys. Investigator found no sign of lockpicks or spare keys being used. The entire structure of the scene, the mechanics of the doors and windows, pointed to one undeniable fact. When the shots were fired, the only living beings inside the home were Caitlyn, Matthew, and the dog. The concept of a break-in started to fall apart. There were no exit paths, no sign of movement beyond the room. That made the Speck home in Eagle Landing had effectively become an airtight capsule. On that, no one had left until law enforcement arrived. At the hospital where Matthew Speck was taken, doctors and on-call detective began through examination of his injuries. Matthew claimed he sustained the wound during a violent struggle with armed intruders, but forensic specialists come to different conclusions. After closely analyzing the cut on his arms, the wounds were shallow with a smooth edge, nothing like that jagged or torn laceration typically seen someone is fighting off wild knife strike. There were no sign of defensive wound, no deep gashes on the palm or back of the hands, which usually appears when someone tries to grab or blood shields their face. The experts labeled the injuries as classic self-inflicted or hesitation marks. The placement of cuts on the forearms and front of the abdomen were in areas easily reachable by the person himself. On the top of that, the blood stain on Matthew's clothing suggested he had been standing still when the injuries occurred. In a real attack with movement and struggle, the blood pattern would have been completely different. Praise, smears, chaotic distribution, but they found was clean, consistent and controlled. Detective also took note of Matthew's odd behavior during evidence collection. His story about the alleged intruders kept changing. He couldn't keep the description of their height or clothing straight, but stayed consistent. Though was his focus on his own pain. Medical reports confirmed that none of his wounds were life-threatening or required advanced surgical treatment. In fact, they were not almost surgical inclusion made at deliberate angles. Investigators compared this with what they saw at the scene. Spotless floors, no sign of physical altercation, and only minor scratch on the one surviving person in the house. The image of a brave fight for survival fell apart under the trained eyes of forensic experts. The second body found in the upstairs bedroom belongs to the family's golden Labrador, Bailey May. For detective, the loss of the dog became a critical piece of the puzzle in understanding the suspect logic. Ballistics confirmed that Bailey May had been shot with the same weapon used on Caitlyn Speck. The angle of the bullet suggested the shot. The shot was fired at the close range. The dog was lying in her usual spot by the bed. Her position indicates she hadn't tried to attack. She never saw it coming. The behavior of the family's Labrador that made become a critical point against the theory of an outside intruders. Neighbors in the Eagle Landing community later confirmed that Bailey May had always been vocal around strangers, barking whenever someone unfamiliar came near the gate or stepped into hallway. But around 5 a.m. that morning, no one in the neighborhood reported hearing a single bark until the gunshot. This suggested that whoever moved through the house and entered the bedroom was someone the dog recognized, someone she didn't see as a threat until it was too late. Investigators asked a key question: why would robbers supposedly after money waste time and bullets on a pet that posed no real danger? In the context of a staged scene, the shooting of the dog looked more like an attempt to eliminate any variable that couldn't disrupt the silence or trigger unwanted attention. In his essential statement, Matthew Speck claimed the intruders killed Bailey May just because. But the logic didn't hold. The forensic team believed it was a calculated move, an intentional act by someone who knew the dog well. enough to realize she could betray him with her reaction or run the illusion of a break-in. Even in this, Bailey May pointed investigator toward a chilling truth. Whoever pulled the trigger was someone from inside her wallet. The bullet just ended up her life, became just as vital, a piece of evidence, as the shell casing found beside Caitlyn's body. While Matthew Speck remained under medical observation, tech experts find some extracting data from his personal digital devices, his phone and computers, both seized from the Eagle Landing home, became a kind of a black box, capturing the suspect's every move in the day leading up to the event. According to the cyber forensic reports, Matthew's online activity took a dark and specific turn in the days before the shooting. His browser story showed dozens of visits to pages related to toxicology and techniques for staging criminal scenes. Analysts confirmed that he wasn't just skimming articles. He had spent hours on specialized forums reading detailed discussion and gathering information. On his phone, screenshots were found showing a map with potential exit routes from the neighborhood. Routes that could theoretically be used by someone trying to flee undetected. What stood out to the detective was the timing. Thus, online searches were happening late at night while Caitlyn was still in the next room. The existence of this kind of digital footprints on the phone of someone claiming a sudden home invasion became a cornerstone of the prosecution case. But what truly unraveled Matthew's story wasn't just what he searched, it was when the timestamps on his activity directly contradicted his claim of a happy committed marriage. To determine a motive, investigators broke the case down into key areas: Matthew's personal relationship and his financial expectations. The most revealing testimony came from an ex-girlfriend, someone Matthew had reconnected with few months before. June 2020, she provided a message in which Matthew plainly stated that his current marriage was nothing more than formality. He intended to take care of soon, so he could start a new life with her. The second branch of the investigation led detectives to one of Matthew Speck's co-workers. While his former girlfriend saw him as a romantic soul longing for freedom, his colleague painted a different picture, one of a calculated and pragmatic man. According to her, Matthew rarely complained about Caitlyn as a person. What really frustrated him were the legal complications around dividing assets. He repeatedly emphasized that Caitlyn would never agree to sell their home in Hanhana. For Matthew, a legal divorce meant losing the property he valued most and facing years of financial obligation. The co-worker confirmed to investigators that Matthew had asked her what typically happens to shared real estate in the event of a supposed unexpected passing. Suddenly, the pieces fell into place. Removing Caitlyn would allow Matthew to keep the house, start a new life with someone else, and avoid the financial downfall a divorce would bring. It was the classic struggle between wanting a clean estate and refusing to pay the legal price for it. Just hours after being discharged from the hospital, Matthew Speck found himself in an interrogation room. Detectives would use a strategy known as logic traps. When Matthew once again claimed that he had chased the intruders down the hallway all the way to the door, one detective asked the crucial question: Matthew, if you chased them, how did your responding officers find the front door locked from the inside? And why was there no damage to any of the windows? Matthew had no real answers. He stamped over his own timeline, first suggesting he might have locked the door himself in a state of shock, then wavering into bizarre territory, calling the intruders phantoms. Then detective presented the forensic report on his wound, the shallow nature of the cut, and the complete lack of gunpowder residue on his clothing. Someone you would absolutely expect if someone had fought a shooter at close range. Completely shattered his story. But the final blow came with the printout from Chapter 6. Detective reads his own search history aloud to him. How to fake a robbery. Matthew Speck went silent. The room fell into an uneasy stillness, a kind of unspoken admission. The airtime home, the surgical cuts, the disturbing detail, browser histories. There was no room for talk of mysterious strangers. Matthew Speck was placed under arrest. He never offered a real explanation of why his online searches mirrored the crime scene so preciously. Drawing from ballistics testing, blood spatter analysis, and digital evidences, investigators reconstruct the timeline of what really happened at that night. The events didn't begin at 5 a.m. As Matthew had claimed, they began much earlier in darkness of the Eagle Landing neighborhood. Matthew waited until Caitlyn was sound asleep. He retrieved the weapon, one he had prepped and loaded ahead of time. At that moment, the only one inside the home were Caitlyn, Matthew, and their Labrador Bailey May. The first shots were fired in the upstairs bedroom. Caitlyn was still in the bed. She never had a chance to react. She made no defensive movement. Immediately after that, Matthew returned the weapon on Bailey May. The dog, who had shown no aggression toward her owner, was taken down where she lay. With the only living being in the house now gone, Matthew Speck moved on to execute the plan he would studied online. He walked from room to room carefully, staging what he wanted to look like a break-in. But even in this performance, she was selectively avoiding damage to valuable electronics and the home interiors, which he clearly intended to keep. Once he finished setting the scene, Matthew went into the bathroom. Using a sharp object, presumably a knife later found bearing his DNA, he inflicted a series of shallow cuts on his arms and abdomen. He did this in front of a mirror, carefully controlling the depth of each wound to avoid hitting any major arteries. Only after making sure he looked the part of a victim, waiting until daylight began to creep in the neighborhood, did Matthew finally pick up his phone and call emergency service. The entire process from the first shot to the call took considerable time, which explained why blood on the both Caitlyn and the dog had already started to dry. By the time medical personnel arrived, every action Matthew Speck took the night was calculated, aimed at building the illusion of an outside attack, all while keeping himself safe behind the locked doors. In November 2024, the trial began in Berkeley County Court. Prosecutor Alexander Mertz approached the case like a math problem, precise, structured, and undeniable. Instead of lengthy opening statement, he let the technical experts speak. A forensic pathologist demonstrate why Matthew's wound couldn't have happened during a struggle. These aren't marks from chaos, told the jury. These are the sign of planning. Ballistics expert backed it up with scientific clarity. The angle of the bullet in the bedroom showed the shooter had been standing still, firing at target who weren't moving. The shell casing found next to Caitlyn and beside Bailey May matched exactly. The prosecutor emphasized that the person who fired those shots wasn't rushed. He operated in a sealed empty home, fully aware of no one would interrupt him. The same day, testimony from Matthew's co-worker and former girlfriend commented the prosecution's case. Both the financial motive and emotional intent were laid bare. The defense attempted to cast doubt by pointing to the poor quality of nearby security cameras, arguing that no footage proved there weren't intruders. But that point strengthens the state's position. No one had exited the home at that night. After 5 days of intense testimony, the trial neared its conclusion. On the final day, the jury was reminded of the glaring contradiction at the heart of Matthew's story. His state of chasing attackers through a house that was physically locked from the inside. Deliberation didn't take long. For those who hadn't seen the crime scene photos and the search history on Matthew's phone, the truth was crystal clear. When everyone returned to the courtroom, the silence was almost physical. Judge Deirdre Jefferson accepted the verdict form from the jury for person. Matthew Garrett Speck was found guilty on all accounts: premeditated homicide, cruelty toward an animal, and unlawful use of a firearm. Caitlyn's mother and sister, seated quietly in the gallery, received the verdict through silent tears. It wasn't a surprise, but it was the official confirmation that the man they had once welcomed as a family was, in the end, her executioner. The jury agreed. From the first internet search to the final call to emergency services, every step Matthew Speck took had been part of calculated and cold-blooded plan. The final chapter of the Berkeley County case came with sentencing. Judge Jefferson didn't soften her language. Matthew Speck was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. An additional 10 years were added. added, making it legally impossible for him to pursue early release based on good behavior under South Carolina law. The court emphasized that Speck hadn't just committed a crime, he had tried to manipulate the justice system by staging a false attack. The level of cool precision was a decisive factor in handing down the maximum sentence. As of now, Matthew Speck is serving his term in a South Carolina correctional facility designated as without possibility of release. The fate of Eagle Landing Home, the silent motive behind the crime, was also sealed. Under state law, a person cannot benefit from their own offense. The property was transferred to Caitlyn's heir. This case will remain in the Hanhana archive as a chilling reminder that in the digital age of forensic, perfect cover-ups don't exist. Caitlyn Speck and Bailey May are now at peace, and their story reached an end, guided by facts that couldn't be locked behind any. Thank you for watching and for your good comments. Please don't forget to subscribe our channel and hit the like button.